Hi there. So I've recently been building a number of queues at work, both normal queues in which you grab an item from the queue. So something that's been waiting in a list. So something comes into the queue, it's at the end of the line, and then you pull something from the front of the line, and those each item behind it moves up. The other type of queue, so it's not really properly a queue, but I'm not sure what else to call it. I guess it's just an application. So the user will input uh, something to identify the next item or order, and then the application will grab that and lock it to the user in a similar fashion that you would with a queue. But in this case, in this case, just the user specifies what the item is. So we'll start over here at the database. I'm going to walk you through this. I made a little Lucid chart. I'm not very good with Lucid charts, so bear with me. I'll also leave a link to this Lucid chart down in the description. So let's start over here with the database. So for the user, the only thing you're actually going to need for relating to the queues and the normal application is going to be ID. Obviously, you're probably going to add other fields in here for the rest of your application, but in this case, you only need ID. For the structure of the item, or for the item or the order or whatever you're using, whatever is going to be your queue item, you're going to need. Actually, you don't need ID, but you're going to have ID almost always in whatever table you're using. Item locked, which is going to be a boolean, and you can replace item with, for example, if you're using orders, replace item with order, so it'd be order underscore locked. Um, so item locked is going to be a boolean value, and this is going to be either true or false or null. So I use null typically. I don't know why. It's just what the people were teaching me did, but it doesn't really matter. False may be more correct, but it again doesn't really matter too much. So true, false, or null. Item locked by is going to be set equal to the user ID of the user that is locking the item or has already locked the item. Or it's going to be set to null in the case that it's not locked. Item locked at is an optional field, which I highly recommend, which is set to the current timestamp when the user locked the order. So both the normal queue and the normal application start in the same place. So let's start there. First, you check, does the user have a locked item already? This is typically done on page load. That's how I do it. Maybe prior to page load, however you choose to do it. In the case that they do, you're going to go ahead and just straight up redirect to the action page. This is assuming that you're going to have an action page separate than the page that actually locks the item for the queue or specifies getting the next item. You could do it on the same page. Again, that might be more complex. This is typically how I do it. So I redirect to the action page, and this I'll show you. This line goes. Oops, come on. This line, man, I clearly don't know how to use this. This line goes all the way down here and reconnects with the other paths, which I will come back to once we get there. So if you have no currently locked item, if the user doesn't already have an item locked, then they're going to either input an identifier for the item. So that may be item ID. If you're using order, for the companies I've worked for, we have order ID, order number, and then each order has order items, which have IDs. You can pass in whatever value you want here, or you can also have a button say that says next, whatever you want to do to specify that you need to get another item. Say you have an input that is order ID. Once that order ID is input, you're going to go ahead and do any front-end validation that is necessary. So in this case, if your ID is going to be always an integer, then you're going to go, or an integer of a certain length, you validate that so that you make sure that they're inputting in the correct format. And if there's any errors, then you're going to go ahead and show that right away and make no requests to the backend. Just it takes out any of the latency, and so you're going to validate right away. Now, if there's no front-end validation errors, you're going to go ahead and send it to the backend. So when you you make a request to the backend to lock that specific item to that user. So the backend is going to do some checks for errors. So one of them is going to be, is the item prepared to be locked? This is if the user specifies which item to grab. In this case, so say you have ID 1234, it's going to go ahead and find item 1234, the backend is, and it's going to ensure that all the criteria are met to make sure that this order is ready to be locked, or this item is ready to be locked and had this action performed on in the queue. Now, if there isn't an item specified by the user and this is a proper queue, then what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that there are any items in the queue. If there's no items to have actions performed on, you're going to go ahead and return an error, say, hey, this is all, there's no more items waiting. Again, this is maybe something you want to do up here. Check currently locked. If there's nothing locked, you may want to put something right here, right below it, that maybe checks to make sure there's any items to be locked, or any items in the queue, and you may display how many items are in the queue, for example. Again, this is all up to choice. That's how I would do it, but I had forgotten to include that in the Lucid chart. Does the user have a locked item? Again, we already checked this earlier, but I typically do an extra check here just in case. Say you have multiple tabs open, for the user has multiple tabs open. When the first tab loads, they don't have item locked. And then they load the second tab right away, no item locked. They lock an item on the second tab. Well, you go to lock an item on the first tab, and the page hadn't reloaded. So you still have the option to lock another item, but when you go to lock the item, the backend's going to say, hey, the item's already locked to your user, so you cannot lock another item. That's why you would have this extra check in here. Is the item locked by another user? This one's kind of self-explanatory. You're going to go ahead and check and see if that item is already locked to another user. And this kind of goes hand in hand with this first, let me move that, with this first bullet point here. Actually, those are exactly the same. So if it has the error, which any of those errors, you're going to send it to the front end and display that error on the front end. If it has no error, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and lock that item to the user on the back end, which means in the database, you're going to set item locked to true. You're going to set item locked by to the user ID that made the request, and then you're going to set item locked at current timestamp. And then whatever other fields you choose to set, you can go ahead and do that. But again, these are the ones that are required. So, except item locked at is optional. So then you're going to redirect to the action page. So now the order or the item is locked to the user. You're going to redirect to the action page, and then this is where we meet up with this other path here, if the user already had a locked order. So at this point, when you're on the action page, and you can get the locked item by the user. And I actually, if I want to point out, you want to add one extra check in here. So when you load into the action page, you want to make sure that the user already has a locked order. Actually, you can do it in this request. That's how I would do it. So let's say in this request, you're going to get the locked item by the user. So you maybe feed in the user ID, and you're going to get that locked item. So on the back end is going to process the user's ID and say, let's go grab the order or the item that's locked to that user. If it comes back with no order, it's going to go ahead, or no item, it's going to go ahead and send that error to the front end, and it's going to redirect back to the page to the action, or the page to get the next item, or to input a new item ID. Now, if you do have an item locked to that user, then it's going to go ahead and send back the data required for the front end required to perform the action. So it's going to send back the data to the front end for that item. You're going to go ahead and populate the data into whatever your action is, whatever your application does, which is going to be the perform action on item. That's what this whole page is. That's the full function of this page. So now you've grabbed the item, it's locked to the user. The user is going to perform the function or perform the action on the item. And then once the user's done, they're going to press finish or complete order or complete item. and it's going to go ahead and unlock the order. Now, there's another option which you could do, which I've done for some queues, is a flag for error. So I like to have a button, maybe with a pop-up or something something similar that you can press, and it says flag for error. So it flags the item for an error, and it sets an error in the database. So somebody else can maybe go through and look at all the errors that came through in the queue. Maybe you even want to add a little note for them or a little input box for a note, whatever you want to do. And it allows for somebody, maybe a manager or an admin, to come back and look at all the errors that were in the queue. Maybe someone who has more knowledge about how to deal with those errors. But in this case, I didn't add that into the Lucid chart. So you're going to go ahead and unlock the order when the user's done with the action, and then you're just going to return to the original queue page. Just redirect back, and you're right back where you started. That brings you all the way back up to here, where you're going to again check for the user having a currently locked item and continue back through the cycle. So I hope that helped. If you guys have any questions, go and leave them in the comments. If you want me to actually make a video that shows maybe building a queue, a simple one, to kind of demonstrate these concepts, just go ahead and let me know. So I hope I could help here, and happy coding.